Hey Fred, thanks for bringing up this saying that beauty, or this idea that beauty is the promise of function. I don't agree with it, but I think it does bring up some interesting uh, you know opportunities for reflection on aesthetic phenomenon, or conscious aesthetic phenomenon, and those experiences and perceptions. And um, uh, 2 points. I'm gonna make this as short and sweet as I can. There's a difference between being attracted to, uh, say, or enticed, pulled into, say, a dinner party, and you're driving to the dinner party, and it's important to you, the dinner party. It's important to you as subjectively satisfying, or it's important to me as subjectively satisfying if I'm driving to the party. Let's say that as I'm getting there. So that's one kind of importance. Okay, it's the first one. And then, but as I'm getting to the party and pulling up, my good friend calls me, and he says, "Hey, John, uh, he's at the hospital and he's hurt and he needs me to be there for whatever reason, or just uh, to be there for him or her." That is important to me also, but it's not a kind of subjectively satisfying thing for me, right? That's not the right word for it. I wouldn't describe the phenomenon that way. That is something that doesn't entice me because I want to go to the party. I mean, that's a promise of function. I might get late, or to put it crudely, I might get late, or satisfy certain urges and desires that I might have in, uh, hedonistic desires, or just good conversation, whatever is going on. It's just fun. I want to go. I'm attracted to it. It's pulling me in. But when my friend calls me, it's not like that. It doesn't attract me to go help him. It challenges me to go help him. And this is really the difference between, that's the first distinction I wanted to make, is that between the subjectively satisfying and value, and my friends, the friendship and the dignity of my friend, and the empathic connection that I feel with another person who's my friend. And I feel that my friend, well, I'm going to wait till I get to this other distinction, but that's the first distinction I wanted to make, is between experiences where, like a delicious meal that attracts you and pulls you in, and uh, looking at an artwork, at a piece of, I mean, when you look at a delicious steak dinner, or whatever, if you're a vegetarian, a delicious, whatever you eat, you know, squash or something, uh, that doesn't stand, the value of the meal doesn't really stand independently of the subjective appeal, the subjective satisfaction that I might get from it. But in the case of beauty, um, uh, or anything that's you could really call value, it's objective in the sense that the value stands in the object, and the object itself, independently of me. This is just a phenomenological distinction, not a metaphysical distinction or anything like that. But the object itself has the value, and the value is that in terms of which motivates a value response in me. And that's different. I mean, I feel like I I have to give, we'll say, the entity its due. The beautiful entity, I feel like I have to give it its due. Like, I appreciate the object's beauty because it has the entity itself, independently of me, has the beauty, and it's manifesting it to me, and then I appreciate that. Okay, which of course will come with a sense of subjective satisfaction. But in the first case, this is the important thing, is that in the first case, in the case of value, it's the value, in the case of the value manifesting entity, it's the value that comes first, right? That I perceive. And then the subjective satisfaction, like the delight in experiencing and consciously perceiving this aesthetic entity, this aesthetically pleasing entity, um, that aesthetic pleasure comes from the beauty in the object, right? Whereas that's the first thing, and then in the second, and then the other, uh, this whole promise of function idea, that's the subjectively satisfying um, because of some appeal that it makes to my own appetites and is not independent of me. The importance is essentially arises from the subjective satisfaction that I can get from it, whereas in the case of value, the subjective satisfaction arises from the value the object has, rather than so it's really the reverse. To put it more succinctly, um, in the case of value, the distinction I'm making between the subjectively satisfying and value. In the case of value, the importance is the importance, the objective importance, the value, is the source of the subjective satisfaction, the delight I might get of viewing it. In the other case of subjective satisfaction, which is the promise of function, which I think is very different from beauty, the subjective satisfaction that I get is the source of the importance, rather than the importance in the thing being the source of my subjective satisfaction. That's the first thing. The second distinction is these are all experiential, phenomenological distinctions, remember, is the fact that there's a demand character to value, to the perception of value, objective value in the thing, independent of subjective, uh, independent of any necessary involvement of subjective satisfaction on my part. The value is perceived in the thing as a demand character, and it's sort of, I feel like I have to give the entity its due, you know, in that sense that I feel a kind of obligation character to the object which motivates my appreciation of its beauty for it. So those are the two things: the difference between value, which stands in the object, the beauty, the value of the beauty that stands in the entity itself, independent of me, and that it demands, in some sense, there's a kind of demand that it makes that I have to recognize, that I have to, if I'm going to be genuine and sincere, um, I really will feel. I don't have to yield to it. I don't have to. I could be, I could act any way. Depending on how I could be really in a bad mood or something. But that's sort of there. I sort of know in a lot of times if I'm open to it. Um, yeah. Anyway, I won't go on with that. I just want to keep it just short and sweet. But there's a difference between value, which is objective in it, and then there's the subjective satisfaction that I could get from it. There is a third thing I think, which is that it's not like you're going to have one or the other. It's not like if something's in a value in itself, there's no subjective satisfaction. I have said that the delight will come from viewing it, and that's fine. But the delight again comes from the value. Um, Whereas in the case of subjective satisfaction, the importance comes from me, comes from my own, the promise of function, which is different from the aesthetic beauty of something, which is not an instrumental kind of phenomenon, the promise of a function. Um, that's just a phenomenological fact in my experiences reflecting upon it. Then the second thing was the demand character, because it seems like it's in the thing, which is connected to what I said before. There's a third type of phenomenon, but I'll just mention it briefly, and that's when something is not just subjectively satisfying to me, and not just some objective value that demands a value response from me that's in the thing, but there's a mix of the two where it's objectively good for the whole person, right? So if you feel a craving for, a glass of, let's say that you're a recovering alcoholic, and you feel, a craving for a glass of whiskey or something, that's subjective satisfaction. The value does not stand in the glass of whiskey. That's just not the way the phenomenon appears. So not the way that it manifests itself to you in the first personal mode of self-givenness. That's not your conscious experience of it, I don't think. Um, but it's subjectively, it's something that entices you. Uh, so that's a subjectively satisfying. But let's say that going to an AA meeting or something, or like calling your sponsor, just not you per se, but any person, as an example, that's something that's maybe not subjectively in the same sense as the glass of whiskey, not like appealing to you, to not enticing you to do it, but it is a value, right? Not an independent value, but it's sub so it's both subjective, the calling of your sponsor is subjective in the sense that it's good for you, but it's not just something that's important or good for you in like a particular aspect of some appetite you have, but for the whole person, for you as a whole, and like in your existential identity, it's objectively good for you. So that's another distinction you made. There's value in the object. There is the subjectively satisfying, which is just satisfies one of my particular appetites and needs, which is also important, but in a different way, because it's dependent upon me. Whereas the value, such as in the aesthetic phenomena of beauty, is in the thing, um, or let's say like the dignity of another person, that's in the person, independently of me. And the third thing is the objectively good for the subject, for me, for the whole person, not just some particular appetite. So those are three distinctions I want to make, and then the first of those two having to do with, I think, really, um, just I think really just puts a big strain on this idea that beauty is the promise of function, promise of some instrumental use that I can get out of the entity that strikes me as beautiful. Um, it uh, it could be involved, but it's not going to touch the essence of it. I don't see how you can get from the promise of function to the beauty that inheres in the entity itself, independently of any promise of function it might have for me. You know, so then again, we can make a distinction between the promise of function, some instrumental use, and a subjective satisfaction of while viewing while appreciating the beautiful entity. Um, because if something is beautiful, if it has that value in itself, I will get a sense of subjective satisfaction and delight out of it because it will, in giving it its due, and the demand characteristic there of appreciating it. Um, but but that stands independently of me, and that doesn't have to include this promise of function, which is, you might have the promise of function in perception. You might see, a bridge or something, or something that's useful to you in a purely instrumental manner that doesn't give you any kind of delight necessarily. So those are two different things, and I don't think that that can be easily defended. So um, on the basis of this experiential distinction, which I think is what we have to go from if we're talking about the conscious experience of beauty. All right, thanks, Brad.